We are only a handful of days until the 2025 NFL Draft, and with free agency now behind us, today let's talk about every single NFL team's last remaining need as we head into the 2025 NFL Draft. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Let's hop into it. So as you can see, we have a tier list right here. I decided to do it as a tier list so that way we have an easy visual look to see which teams actually need what. In terms of what the actual categories are, I broke it down into different segments, starting off with, of course, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. I decided to merge together since these are more of your offensive skill positions. The offensive line is by itself. Defensive line, I also did go ahead and tie in the linebacking core just to kind of complete the front seven. And then the secondary with both cornerbacks and safeties. For each team, I'll be more specific as to what personal position group they need to focus on. So as we go through it, you'll kind of see how it goes. And we are going to begin with the Arizona Cardinals. By the way, if you want to see your favorite team, I'll be doing this in alphabetical order. So if you want to just kind of skip to your favorite teams or just want to look at certain ones, you can obviously just check out the order. We're starting though with the Arizona Cardinals. This team already has a quarterback. They already have a running back. They could maybe use a wide receiver too. They obviously have tight end. Offensive line does have some holes, but I feel like it's a little bit okay for right now. Defensive line, you just brought in Calais Campbell, pair that with Dalvin Tomlinson, and of course Josh Sweat. So I think really the last thing that's kind of missing for this roster is maybe a few pieces on the offensive line or a cornerback one. Kind of could go either way, but I do personally believe that maybe the cornerback group is good enough for right now. It's just kind of missing like a Will Johnson. So I'm going to go with maybe their last big remaining need is just a couple more pieces on the offensive line to kind of just shore up that unit as much as possible. Then there's the Atlanta Falcons, and I would say this team is basically set on quarterback with Michael Penix Jr. They're set on skill positions, though they can maybe use a wide receiver 3. They're set on offensive line, but they maybe could use a center. I would say they probably just need a disruptor up the middle or a disruptor off the edge. They have a couple guys there who they brought in last year and who they have in free agency, but they haven't really brought in like a go-to guy that you feel absolutely comfortable that they're going to get you 8+ sacks. So if this team could hypothetically draft somebody in the first round that could do that, I think you might as well go ahead and do so. I also do think linebackers also a need, so it kind of does work out both ways. Then there's the Baltimore Ravens. Of course, they don't need quarterback. They have, two-time MVP, arguably should be a 3-time MVP, Lamar Jackson. They have Derrick Henry. They have some good receivers. Maybe they could use another receiver, but they feel pretty good there. Obviously, Mark Andrews is highly likely. You have 2 tight ends. Offensive line is still really solid. You had a bunch of younger pieces now moving into starting positions. Patrick McCarry's out the door, but you still feel really good. If I had to say what this team might need, I guess I would just throw it into defensive line. I don't think their front seven's particularly bad. It's just maybe could use like one more disruptor, maybe like another guy who can get you, I don't know, a lot of pressure on the quarterback. The same thing I said about the Baltimore Ravens also kind of does apply to the Buffalo Bills. They have their quarterback, last year's MVP. They have a good running back, although there's been some recent kind of question marks regarding his James Cook and the Buffalo Bills, but I'm going to assume they're going to be fine there. They could use a Amari Cooper replacement in the receiving core, but I don't think it's necessarily the biggest need. Obviously, tight end, they're pretty set with Kincaid. Offensive line is really good, so I think it's just maybe another disruptor on the defensive line, somebody who can get to the quarterback, put pressure on the quarterback. With all my mock drafts that I've done, I've talked about the Bills and the Baltimore Ravens and all the top tier contending teams. They're trying to get their defensive line to look very similar to what we saw last year with the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is running for his life, and that's kind of how you beat that team. The Ravens and the Buffalo Bills have not been able to get over the hump in big part because of the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think they take a page out of the Philadelphia Eagles and just go ahead and go all in on making sure their front seven is as dominant as possible. The Carolina Panthers, they have been aggressive in fixing up their defensive line, but I still do think they're a true dominant edge rusher away from having a really solid defensive line. Yes, you brought in Tershawn Horton, a couple run stuffers, but just think they really need one go-to pass rusher off the edge. Then there's the Chicago Bears. I mean, this team really has fixed up a lot of their issues. Obviously, Caleb Williams at quarterback. You feel really good about your 2 receivers, DJ Moore, Roma Dunze. You have Cole Kmet, who kind of continues to always be a little bit of a question mark, but if he's on the roster for the foreseeable future, you feel really good. Offensive line would have been where I would have put this at, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago, but they really fixed that unit up. Maybe they could use a left tackle or some interior offensive line depth, but their front 5 is, or starting 5, I should say, is really solid. Defensive line-wise, I think they just really could use depth more so than like a true starter, and secondary-wise, their secondary is pretty darn good. So I'm going to put this in at running back. I think DeAndre Swift is a fine sort of temporary placeholder for who I think could potentially be Genty or Quinshon Judkins or some other stud in this year's draft. But I do think this team could really use a change of pace guy, somebody a bit more of a bruisier style, or maybe a 3-down guy if you somehow do get lucky and get Ashton Genty. Ben Johnson wants to run the football. This Chicago Bears team would like to maybe find an upgrade over DeAndre Swift. At least I would assume so. Next is the Cincinnati Bengals, and yet again, I'm just going to stick it right here with the front seven. Yes, they could also use some help in the secondary very badly, some safety help, some corner help, but they've already kind of drafted some guys here and there. It kind of feels like you just have to find somebody now opposite of Trey Hendrickson if we assume he's on the roster next year. But if he's not, then yeah, they're doubling down and you have to take a defensive lineman. I have heard some buzz about them potentially taking some offensive players, but man, I mean, the Bengals defense was abysmal last year. It was the reason why they lost so many games, so I feel like you almost have to go defense to just try to figure out how you can make that defense go from bad to at least like league average next year. For the Cleveland Browns, it's going to be quarterback. Yes, they need a lot of other things. They could use a running back. They could use a receiver. They can use some offensive line help. Obviously, if you want Abdul Carter to pair next to Myles Garrett, that makes sense. Kind of honestly could put the Browns in every single spot here, but the biggest one is, I mean, they need a quarterback. Their quarterback is Deshaun Watson or Kenny Pickett. And yeah, that's probably not going to cut it for either one of those teams. Next is the Dallas Cowboys, and this one's kind of difficult because there's a couple ways I could go here. Obviously, they have Dak Prescott, so you're good there. You just traded for Joe Milton, which that's really exciting for Cowboys fans. But they need a running back because right now their starter is, I guess, Javonte Williams. They probably should have just paid Rico Dowdle, but they didn't. They also need receiver too next to CeeDee Lamb. Offensive line-wise, they could definitely use some players there, though they have a couple young guys who maybe you're hoping develop to become something. You know, Brock Hoffman, Cooper Beebe, Tyler Guyton, but still feel like there is a lot of youth there and a good chance that offensive line isn't very good. D-line wise, I think bringing in Dante Fowler kind of fixed up the edge rushing room. You could use maybe a run stuffer up the middle, but they've been fairly aggressive in adding pieces in the front seven. And then secondary wise, you did bring in Kaiir Elam, but I kind of feel like this team could really use an upgrade for that cornerback 3 / maybe the nickel role. With that said, I do think skill positions offensively are their biggest need, especially probably running back first and then wide receiver second. But because how deep the running back class is, I think you take wide receiver round 1 and then running back round 2. But let's move on to the Denver Broncos, who have a couple different needs, but I would probably say their biggest needs kind of also fall in line with the Cowboys, where they could use a wide receiver 2 while also needing a starting running back. I'll also throw this out there. I think they could maybe use some depth in the defensive line because their defensive line maybe could use some long-term answers just because some of their contracts are expiring here soon. They could also maybe use a cornerback alongside Pat Surtain if you don't really fully trust Riley Moss, but I feel okay about him. So I'm going to stick him in here. Kind of like Dallas, I think they need running back more so than receiver, but I think they should draft receiver first and running back second. Or, I mean, if Hampton falls to you or Genty, you don't overthink it. So either way, they're good. The Detroit Lions are kind of an interesting team here. Obviously, they don't need quarterback. They maybe could use another receiver, but they're pretty safe there. Same with running back and tight end. Offensive line, maybe you just want more of a bigger guard presence than what they have right now. Obviously, you lose Kevin Zeitler, which that kind of sucked, but I think I'm just going to keep it in the front seven, like a true pass rusher next to Aiden Hutchinson would be nice. Sure, also you could go cornerback, but I think you're hoping that Terran Arnold can take a big step forward in year 2. So because you kind of feel like you have an answer with Arnold, I'll just stick it at defensive line, and I think they just need an opposite true pass rusher to Aiden Hutchinson. So I'll put that in the front seven there. All right, the Green Bay Packers are a very interesting team because I could honestly put them either way here. You really could use a pass rusher next to Rashawn Gary, and you know, Lucas Van Ness hasn't really panned out, but at the same time, there's always question marks regarding Jair Alexander and if he's going to be on the team or if he's not. And if he is on the team, is he going to stay healthy? So because of that, I guess I'll put the Packers in the cornerback spot because I think they should be in the market for at least a second cornerback next to what they already have. I could have threw them also in receiver, but they have so many wide receiver 2s. It just feels like they need a wide receiver 1. Whereas for cornerback, I don't know how many answers they really have there. So a couple of different ways I could put the Packers, but I'll throw them in the cornerback spot. All right, the Houston Texans are kind of an interesting team. Obviously, defensively, they're looking pretty sharp. Quarterback, they're set. Running back, they're set. Wide receiver is a bit of a question mark, which is kind of crazy to think about because last year that was kind of like what everyone was super excited about. Oh, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. And then they all got hurt. And we never got to see that triplet of receivers ever like fully go out there and play like a full season together, which kind of a bummer. And Tank Dell obviously probably going to miss a lot of time. So I'm tempted to go receiver, but I think once Tank Dell does come back, they should be fine there long term. So I'll just put offensive line. Yes, they have dressed it enough to where I feel like the offensive line is serviceable right now, but still feel like this offensive line is a little bit older, really needs an influx of young talent and could just use a couple starters still. So yes, they've addressed it in some ways, but they still have a little bit more work to be done. Next is the Indianapolis Colts, and there's a lot of different ways I can go here. I could go hypothetically to the quarterback position because Anthony Richardson's been a bit of a flop so far. Running back, they're set. Wide receiver, they're set. Tight end, they're not set. They desperately need a tight end. Offensive line, they did lose some dudes in the offseason, but I still think you're okay there. Maybe you feel like you could replace those guys with somebody in the draft, but I think you should be fine for now. Defensive line-wise, they could maybe use another disruptor or a replacement for EJ Speed, but maybe it's not their biggest needs, and they also address the secondary pretty heavily with Cameron Bynum and Charvarius Ward. So I'll put it in the skill position group just because they really desperately badly need a tight end. It's one of the weird teams that has a tight end issue. Like most teams don't have a tight end issue, but this team for whatever reason does. They badly need to find a tight end to give Anthony Richardson a go-to target because right now they don't feel like they have that guy in the tight end room, so I think that is probably their biggest need. All right, the Jacksonville Jaguars are another team that is really interesting because quarterback they're set, but running back is a big-time question mark. Also, who's going to be their wide receiver too alongside Brian Thomas Jr. Tight end is also a question mark too, so you can kind of throw them in here and just say they need all three. Offensive line help they definitely could use, although they did bring in Patrick McCarry, but maybe you want to find a bit more answers in the middle. The defensive line, I think you feel okay about, but defensive tackle for sure is a need. And then a true outside corner. Like you brought in Jordan Lewis, who's I'm assuming going to play in the nickel. I would not want to try him out at outside corner. So a lot of different ways I could go here. I guess for sake of argument, because they kind of need all three of these, running back, receiver, and tight end, I guess I'll just throw the Jaguars in here and just kind of say they need all three of these all pretty darn bad. Maybe running back being the biggest need, tight end being the second biggest need, and then a wide receiver 2 next to Brian Thomas Jr. But if you want to throw them in cornerbacks as well, I definitely do think that makes some sense. All right, the Chiefs are here. Quarterback, they don't need. Running back, wide receiver, tight end. They could need all three of those, but I think you're okay for now because running back wise, maybe you believe Pacheco can come back healthy and you probably will draft one later in the draft. Tight end wise, you're probably just looking for a future understudy to what you have in Kelsey, and wide receiver, maybe some question marks now with Rashee Rice, but I'm going to stick them in offensive line. Obviously losing Joe Thuney and just having the tackle problems they had last year. Yes, they've sort of addressed it, but still feel like because this is a team that is going to try to compete for a championship, I don't know if their offensive line is championship caliber right now. All right, the LA Chargers are an interesting team because they could go a number of different ways here. Right off the bat, I'm looking at wide receiver and tight end as potentially a need here. I'm also looking at defensive line because Khalil Mack's only getting older, and yes, you brought him back on a good deal, so maybe you feel okay about it for this year, but I think long term you would like to have some younger answers in that edge rushing room. But I think I'll just stick it in here at running back, receiver, tight end because I think they really could use a second receiver next to McConkey and QJ, and I think tight end is also a huge need because they just don't have anybody who's competent right now. So for that, I'll put the Chargers in here. I'm looking at you, Colston Loveland. I'm also looking at guys like Matthew Golden, who I think would all be good fits for this Chargers team. All right, the LA Rams. This team feels like it is one of the more complete rosters out there where it just feels like they could kind of go wherever they want, like whatever's best player available. Maybe you want to go quarterback to find a future replacement for Matthew Stafford after his contract's up. Maybe you want a tight end. Maybe you want to go with the future right tackle because Havenstein's getting a little bit older. Maybe you want a linebacker, which I think was probably what I might put them at. But I'm also thinking corner. Like they have a number of good cornerback 2s, but they could really use like a true shutdown cornerback 1. So I'm kind of leaning between these two from like the linebacker to, shutdown corner. I guess if I had to say what's a more pressing need, I will go cornerback because I think their front four is super dominant. So like the linebackers' jobs are just a lot easier. So I guess I'll put the Rams inside corner because they could really just use a true shutdown outside corner. Miami Dolphins' offensive line. Teron Armstead literally just retired a few days ago, which by the way, I think it's kind of crappy of him to do this like way after free agency. Like all the good offensive linemen are off the board, and yes, the Dolphins don't really have the money to afford half these dudes, but still, you would at least like to know in advance that Teron Armstead is not going to be there for the future. So they're relying pretty heavily on Patrick Paul to develop. And man, that offensive line just continues to get worse and worse and worse. And Tua is going to have it pretty rough next year, or at least I think, at least on paper. So they got to have a pretty hefty offensive line haul in the draft. Minnesota's here. You have JJ McCarthy at quarterback, so you feel good there. Maybe they could use like a backup. You have Aaron Jones, so maybe you want a future running back, but I think you're okay enough now. Wide receiver, tight end, you feel good about, at least for now. We'll have to wait and see on Jordan Addison. They've kind of addressed their offensive line in a big way. They've also addressed their defensive line in a big way. though I think they could use maybe another run stuffer. I guess I'll just go cornerback. I mean, they lost a few pieces in the offseason in the secondary. The secondary last year was pretty good, but I think it could definitely use another body to just kind of solidify that unit. Kind of like the Rams, they're a pretty complete roster that feels like they can maybe just use one more shutdown corner. All right, the Patriots are here, and they could really go one of two ways. They could go wide receiver or running back, or maybe even tight end, or they can go offensive line, which is where I'm ultimately going to put them at. Haven't really addressed the offensive line too much. In fact, they really haven't addressed both sides of their skill positions nor their offensive line. Yes, they brought in Stephon Diggs, but that was about it. So kind of could use a big haul of both of these positions in this year's draft because they've been pretty aggressive in fixing up the defense. They could also very much use like another edge rusher, but for now, I'll just put them in the offensive line group. All right, the Saints are interesting because they have a really like middling roster with a lot of older players who still are good players, but just feels like they're missing a few pieces. I mean, they could use cornerbacks because Kool-Aid McKinstry still is a little bit of a question mark, though I did like what I saw from him briefly last year, and Alontae Taylor I think is going to stick inside to play nickel. So another outside corner is definitely a need. They could also use maybe a disruptor in the front seven, which would be nice. Maybe some future offensive line help, which they've kind of already started to build a bit of a younger unit, but maybe just like another piece to add to that unit. Replacement for Kamara, another receiver, because Chris Olave is a bit of a question mark. Hell, maybe you want to go quarterback. I feel like I can rationalize all 5 of these spots here. I guess because I only have one quarterback with the Browns, is Derek Carr like that replaceable? Like, I just think this Saints team needs their future guy, right? It feels like they have a decent roster that's just kind of missing their future. So I guess I'll put Saints in quarterback just because I feel like this team kind of is falling and failing because of their older veteran quarterback who doesn't have much of a ceiling. Whereas if they were to draft a guy with a high ceiling who could be their starting quarterback and is young, kind of feel like that does change the trajectory of the Saints team. So personnel wise, it's probably not their biggest need, but in terms of what the team needs, I guess I'll go Saints with quarterback. Giants also need quarterback. This one's pretty obvious. Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston are not getting the job done. The rest of the roster is actually pretty solid. Yes, they definitely could use a right tackle, but you obviously do have Jermaine Illuminor, so maybe you feel okay about that. In terms of other positions, maybe you could use another cornerback to Deonte Banks, and maybe you want to add another receiver next to Neighbors and Slayton, and yes, another tight end would be nice, but they need a quarterback, let's just be honest. The Jets are interesting because I could also throw them in quarterback, but they did sign Justin Fields, and I at least want to allow him to have an opportunity to see how it goes. So they could be thrown into every single spot here because they could use maybe a future replacement for Breece Hall. Yes, you do have Braden Allen or whatever his name is, but Breece Hall is on a 1-year deal, a little injury prone. Could use a receiver because next to Garrett Wilson, you have really nobody. They could also use a tight end because they don't really have too many tight end options. They could use a right tackle, could use some maybe help in the interior of the defensive line. Maybe you could use another cornerback next to Sauce, but I'll stick them in here because I think wide receiver and tight end are pretty dire needs. Moving on to the Raiders, and some similar qualities to the Jets here with the Raiders. Yes, you brought in Geno Smith, but maybe you want to find his understudy, kind of like what the Falcons did with Michael Penix, though that really didn't work out for them. They also badly need running back. They also badly need receiver. Could go offensive line, but I feel like their offensive line is good enough. Offensive line, they're good. Maybe another interior presence would be nice, and they also could use a shutdown cornerback one, but they have to fix up that offense alongside Geno Smith. Like, Geno can't go out there with, I don't even know who their starters are right now, like Jacoby Myers. So yeah, they need another guy there. Philadelphia is a really complete roster that had kind of a rough offseason because like all their highly paid players who were on cheap deals all got massive contracts to go elsewhere. So kind of just break it down. They don't need quarterback. They obviously don't need running back. Maybe a wide receiver 3 would be nice, and maybe a replacement for Dallas Goedert would be nice here, but not huge ones. Maybe you want a replacement for Mekhi Becton or a long-term answer at right tackle because Lane Johnson's years are numbered at this point. Defensive line, yes, because you could also maybe want to find a replacement for Milton Williams or a replacement for Josh Sweat. Cornerback, maybe you want to find a replacement for Darius Slay. I think I'll throw defensive line here for the Philadelphia Eagles because it feels like they could really use another edge rusher / defensive interior to, hopefully replace Milton and Josh Sweat, which were huge instrumental parts as to why they actually won their championship. I guess they're kind of hoping like Nolan Smith develops, but definitely would like to see some more attrition added to those rooms because it's kind of what the Eagles need and what they do. Next up, the Pittsburgh Steelers have been quite the busy team in the offseason. They added Darius Slay, they added DK Metcalf, kind of shored up a couple units that they really needed to badly fix. but they need a quarterback. I mean, we think Aaron Rodgers will be there in 2025, but we're not 100% sure. And even if he is there, Rodgers is, 40 years old. So no matter what is the case here, they have to find their answer at quarterback for the long haul. All right, San Francisco, man, this is a team that just brutalized by free agency. Kind of feels like I can throw them in almost any one of these spots here besides quarterback. Like Christian McCaffrey's now become a question mark. They also could use another receiver maybe. Kittle's good. It's a line you maybe need some replacements for, Trent Williams in the future. They also lost one of their guards, so you probably need to fix up that unit, which was already not the greatest. Defensive line-wise, you probably want to add somebody next to Nick Bosa, and they could maybe use a replacement for Dre Greenlaw. Secondary, you need a replacement for Talanoa Hufanga and Charvarius Ward. So I literally can throw the San Francisco 49ers into multiple of these. If I had to say what's their most pressing issue, I feel like they're all like very equal to one another. I guess I'll throw it in offensive line because the line wasn't great last year and it just got a little bit worse this year. But with Trent Williams, that's kind of dishing through injuries. So I guess we'll throw it in here, but I'm also like leaning towards here as well. But I guess I'll throw it in here just because they did have a nice draft last year that did kind of, got them Bernardo Green, Malik Mustafa, and so on and so forth. All right, Seattle's on the board here, and they definitely need this the offensive lineman here. You got your quarterback of the future in Darnold. You have Kenneth Walker. You have Zach Charbonnet. Receiver-wise, you have Jackson Smith and Jigba. You have Cooper Kupp. I would love to see an outside guy, but they feel okay. Noah Fant. Offensive line has some answers, but it's a little injury prone, especially with Abraham Lucas, and the interior could definitely use more bodies who are capable starters. Defensively, they definitely could use some help, but I think you have enough answers for now. Next is the Buccaneers, who, honestly, surprisingly, when you look at their roster, it's a really complete depth chart from top to bottom. They don't really have a bunch of big-time needs. If I had to say what their biggest need is, I think it might just be another, young disruptor who can play off the edge or even get some pressure on the quarterback up the middle. I think more like edge rusher is what I'm specifically talking about here. They also could use a replacement for Levante David for the future, so I kind of just throw them right here. Jahad Campbell would make a ton of sense here. Jalen Walker would also make a lot of sense, so kind of throw both those names out there for Buccaneers fans. Tennessee, it's quarterback. They've been aggressive in fixing a bunch of different needs in the offseason, but they haven't addressed quarterback. We all think Cam Ward will be taken here. In case you are a Titans fan, I think their next biggest need probably be some help on the defensive line, specifically like an edge rusher, maybe some more help on the offensive line, but quarterback is pretty widely their biggest need right now. And then Washington, again, another one of those teams that is really well put together now, surprisingly. I mean, Washington has been horrible my whole life, but now they're actually looking pretty good. Obviously, you have your quarterback. I think running back receiver is where I'm leaning towards initially, but I think maybe a disruptor off the edge because you did lose Dante Fowler, and maybe another cornerback who's, could be alongside Marshawn Lattimore because just Lattimore's a little bit of a question mark. I just kind of lean towards running back receiver just because I think it might be better to just put together the greatest offense you can right now. But if I'm just talking specific need-wise, I guess I'll go with a true edge rusher for Dorrance Armstrong to take a little bit of a breakout there. But again, that's a Commanders team that is really well put together. So this is my tier list. You guys let me know in the comment section below if you disagree with any of these rankings or lists or anything like that. And if you enjoy, subscribe. Love you guys. Peace.